This is their opportunity to fully and completely change this country. And that is what they're trying to do. They don't have a majority in the Senate. They have 50 votes. It's 50-50. They have a minimal majority in the House. And yet they want to make fundamental, forever changes to our constitutional order. That is what's going on.
This is where freedom rings.
If you believe in America, if you believe in the Constitution empowers us. It's a new day. America's back. America's back, and America's going to get strong again. We're going to defend America, and we're going to defend our interests.
Liberty's voice, LevinTV.
Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, which makes sense since this is LevinTV. I used to joke about a friend of mine who was on radio, and he would always say, this is the so-and-so show, and I'm so-and-so. I said, well, of course you are. But anyway, I do the same thing here. I want to jump into a number of things, and I debated this with myself. You should watch. And I decided I'm going to run this. This is a video clip from Americans for Afghanistan Fund started by John Ondrasik of the band Five for Fighting, which is actually a pretty well-known band. And he's quite the patriot. And this is a video called Blood on My Hands. Now, it can be a little tough to watch from time to time, I'm told. I haven't seen it yet. But I want us to take the time to watch it, and then we'll jump in with the usual reprobates and so forth. But we like to make this show a little different. When we find something that's interesting, well, we want to run it. Find something positive, particularly about dogs, we want to run that too. So let's take a look at this. It's about Afghanistan. Go.
Your own intelligence community has assessed that the Afghan government will likely collapse.
That is not true.
It took the Taliban just 1 week to regain control of Afghanistan.
Disaster unfolding very quickly.
This is really an American catastrophe.
Secretary of State Blinken declaring this is manifestly not Saigon.
Afghans who helped the West now fearing for their lives.
10,000 civilians, SIV applicants, millions more are left behind.
And then this, an act of utter despair. Several fell from the sky.
Afghan mothers passing their children to American soldiers over an airport wall.
It is insane that there are people holding their American passports.
I can't believe the world abandoned Afghanistan. Our friends are going to get killed. They're going to kill us.
The Taliban now has a list of people who were working for the Americans. This effectively can be turned into a kill list.
It's a suicide attack.
120 people have been injured. 13 U.S. troops are also among the casualties.
We will respond with force and precision at our time, at the place we choose, in the moment of our choosing.
7 innocent children and 3 innocent adults dead.
They assessed what the U.S. had left behind. Taliban forces parading captured American weapons.
Americans also forgot to destroy biometric devices.
Extraordinary success and total failure by the United States government.
These Afghan allies who desperately need our evacuation.
This is a betrayal of the American military.
By doing everything in my power right now to get people out.
Got blood on my hands. Got blood on my hands. And I don't understand what's happening.
For those who remain, we will make arrangements to get them out.
There's blood on these hands. They're still American.
Please, I want you to help me, my family.
Left to the Taliban, and he. Now how's that happening?
Any Afghans may leave the country, including those who work for Americans.
Wiggin, blinking, can't you look me in the eye?
If they want, and for whatever reason.
Willie, Millie, tell me, when did you decide this will defend your sacred motto now means never mind?
This comes down to an issue of will and leadership.
hands. Got blood on my hands. Got blood on my hands. Flag of the Taliban. And he over Afghanistan. General Austin, is there no honor in shame? Can you spell Bagram without the letters in blame? Did Uncle Joe stick a drip in your vein?
Do you have any regrets about the Afghan withdrawal?
I can't hear her scream. If she's not, she's not on TV. I can't hear him scream. If he's not, he's not on TV. To every Afghan ally that we left behind, every child who won't know freedom, faces covered and blind, is for this American promise now shit in the fire. Hands, there's blood on our hands. Just one American, and he asking what's happening.
You once said, America is the light of the world. How do you feel about America now?
America not only has lied to the Afghan people, it's lying to itself. I mean, the betrayal is not the collapse of a system only. The betrayal is about fate of millions of people. I mean, who is going to take the words of this administration and probably the future administration seriously? Who?
Do you have any words for President Biden or former presidents who have all led us to where we are now?
I tell them to ask their children, grandchildren, I ask them, their neighbors, to write them a piece of one-page history of America and as far as Afghanistan is concerned. That will be like a mirror put in front of them to see the reality of themselves.
Well, God knows what's going on there now. Horrendous things, horrific things. You see how they grab these young men off the street and they hang them by their necks till they're dead. You see what they do to the women there. You even saw some dead children. Because the Taliban really represents about, population-wise, 15% of the country, mostly. The far-off rural areas, mountain people, that sort of thing. And they've been trying to impose their will on the rest of the country for a long time, as you see. And they've succeeded. The vast majority of people in Afghanistan are not of the Taliban. They're not throwbacks to the 7th century. We now get reports that Iran is working with the Taliban in a very significant way. And we also have reports that Biden is giving the Taliban government, as they call it, the regime, over $300 million in aid. I mean, we've got the amateur team out there. They're ideologues. They don't put America first. They don't put our allies first. And this has done grave damage to the people of Afghanistan. This has done grave damage to people who are suffering all over the world under regimes like this. and it's going to do grave damage to the United States of America. Why do you think Putin and Xi and the Islamo-Nazi regime in Tehran and Un in North Korea has launched now 2 missiles? Why do you think they're aggressive? They don't fear us. They don't respect us. And they certainly don't fear or respect Joe Biden. And the more he talks to them directly, the more nervous I get, because it's apparent to them what's apparent to us. He's incapable of being president of the United States. And so the media pushed Biden into the Oval Office, pushed his administration to the Oval Office, does not give it the kind of review and examination and reportage that is necessary to hold them to account. The Democrat Party's all in. They could care less. They're so busy trying to fundamentally rejigger and re-engineer our own society in this country in a horrendous way. They've divided us. They've weakened us. They undermine our military with critical race theory. They undermine our cops. That's a story you're well aware of. And this is the situation we're in right now, a country that's getting weaker, a culture that is splintering, a civil society that's becoming uncivil, and the rest of the world sees it, including our allies. Taiwan sees it. They are under grave threat from communist China, the way Hong Kong was. Israel sees it. They're under grave threat from Iran and Syria and other enemy countries in that region of the world. It's bad news, what's going on. I want to thank John Ondrasik. That was a beautiful song, a somber situation. The video, Blood on My Hands, the reason I wanted to play it is so that more and more Americans can see it. And we're going to put this in front, Mr. Producer, of the paywall, just to get it out on Getter and get it out on Parler. I'm glad more and more people are joining Getter and Parler. I'm glad more and more opinion makers are too. We did this some time ago. We already knew that Twitter and Facebook were our cancer. I was tired of them censoring me over things that we simply disagreed with. Nothing foul, nothing pornographic, nothing of the sort, nothing conspiratorial. It's just that if you don't agree with the American Marxist movement and their ideology, then they kept putting little statements there. And I said, you know what, I'm not in the 3rd grade. We're not doing that anymore. And I hoped, and I think, as many of you as possible left there too and joined me and others at Getter and Parler. This is very, very important. Very, very important in a free country that we not allow these monopolies to monopolize us and to monopolize speech. They're in bed with the hard left, and enough of that as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, I want to thank Mr. Ondrasik for what he did, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Joe Biden doesn't have a principled bone in his body. That's why he's hard left right now. And when he came into the Senate, he was a segregationist. He opposed integration. He called integrating in communities basically creating jungles that he didn't want to send his kids into. You know, that ought to be the end of his career, right? But it's not. You can be a Democrat, you can molest women, and you can be president of the United States. You can be a Democrat and break the law in many other ways, and you can be president of the United States. You can be a Democrat and thrown with segregationists early in your career, and you can be president of the United States. Really a remarkable thing. But there he is, Joe Biden. Joe Biden doesn't have any credentials to be president of the United States. He never did. He never did. And now he wants to change the Senate rules to pass what they call voting rights. Now, what they call voting rights have nothing to do with voting rights. We've spent a lot of time on this program and on my Fox show. We're going to talk about it again at length on Sunday on my Fox show, what exactly it is that the Democrats want to do. But to put it bluntly, and I've talked about this, as I say, for a long time, and you've seen others now mention the same thing, it's about Democrat Party in power. This is about nationalizing the red states. It's about turning the whole country into California. The propaganda that Joe Biden is using is really remarkable. On the one hand, he trashes our election system as untrustworthy and suppressing the vote. On the other hand, when Donald Trump challenges the last election, they say it was perfectly legitimate. And not only that, it was a perfect election. So on the one hand, they talk about suppressing the vote, right? And then on the other hand, they say, no. Who's suppressing the vote? It's a perfect election. So this is the kind of mindless propaganda we get from people who have thuggish mentalities, who simply want power. So let's take a look at this from CNBC. Joe Biden calling for changing the Senate rules, killing the filibuster in order to protect a corrupt system in many respects that violates the federal constitution, some state constitutions, and just a fair process. Go.
Are you on the side of Dr. Martin Luther King?
Oh, and by the way, you might remember this guy. He's Shepard Smith. Go ahead.
Wallace. That question from President Biden today as he called for carving out an
Looks like he's had some face work, by the way.
Exception to the filibuster to pass new voting rights laws. Speaking in Georgia, in the cradle of the civil rights movement, he said Republicans left his party with no other option after they blocked all attempts to pass the bills. The president also accusing...
Now, no time will Shepard Smith or any one of these talking heads of the left tell you what's in the bill. It's a voting rights bill. How can you be against a voting rights bill, right? And so the media play their role. Go ahead.
...of trying to suppress votes.
It's no longer about who gets to vote. It's about making it harder to vote. It's about who gets to count the vote.
All right, well, let's stop there. Is there somebody who doesn't get to vote who's allowed to vote? It's making it harder to vote. It's never been easier to vote. This isn't 1965. This is 2022. Try and stop somebody from voting. See how far you get. The problem is who gets the vote, and that's not an issue anymore. Who counts the vote? Now, as you listen to this a little differently. How he's trashing the system. And when Donald Trump raises questions about what took place, they trash him for raising the questions about what took place. You guys follow what I'm saying? On the one hand, they're condemning the system. On the other hand, they defend the system if they win. Go.
And whether your vote counts at all.
Ending the filibuster, or at least changing the rules for this case, would require 60 votes in the Senate, which Democrats appear not to have. 19 states enacted nearly 36 laws last year that made it harder to vote.
Now, see that? That made it harder to vote. We're not saying 19 states passed laws that brought regular process back to voting since we are post-pandemic. Why doesn't he explain what those states have done? Some of these states have had to correct what Democrat governors, Democrat secretaries of state, Democrat courts have done, in many cases elected judges, because the state legislature has the power under the federal constitution to determine the election process. But if there are all these glaring efforts to make it harder to vote, to prevent people from voting, why don't they give us the examples and speak of specific details in states? Because they either don't know, or they don't care, or they do know, and they know they're liars. Go.
That's according to the Brennan Center for Justice.
Now, the Brennan Center is named after Justice Brennan, who was a radical leftist on the Supreme Court. And Eisenhower said it was the worst appointment he ever made, because Brennan had been on the New Jersey Supreme Court for a bit. He'd been a Republican. And Eisenhower was looking for a Republican to appoint to the court. It was recommended Brennan. He put Brennan on. And as I say, he said it was the damn worst decision he ever made. And it was. So the Brennan Center is not some objective, independent authority. In fact, quite the contrary. Go.
Republicans control most of the states where those laws passed. In Texas, lawmakers banned voting measures put in place during the pandemic, including drive-through polling places and 24-hour voting. In Florida, they limited the use of ballot drop boxes and added ID requirements and other rules. In Georgia, where the president spoke today, lawmakers also limited drop boxes and made it illegal to hand out food and water.
Oh, wait, whoa. He does his best, folks. Banned handing out food or water to voters. No, they didn't. If a family member comes and gives you water or gives you food, you're allowed to have food or water. What they're trying to prevent is people from getting in that line and handing out things like barbecue sandwiches or corned beef sandwiches or booze or something like that as a way to persuade people in the voting line to vote for people they want to vote. In other words, campaign operatives and so forth. There had been a problem with it. So they didn't ban handing out food or water to voters. Just think about it. Why would you do that? They didn't ban out bringing a sandwich or a drink when you're going to vote. They ban people trying to influence you and create an atmosphere where they're handing out stuff, food and drink while you're in line. Wow, that's such a burden, isn't it? It's such a burden, such an obstacle to voting. But he doesn't explain that, does he? In fact, he just cherry picks this piece and puts it up there. What he doesn't say is they've increased voting hours. They've increased the length of voting, early voting, in Georgia. And that the voting restrictions, quote unquote, that they put in place in Georgia are more liberal than the voting requirements in the state of Delaware, which is completely controlled by Democrats, which is Joe Biden's home state. Go ahead.
Waiting in long lines to vote. Those just a few of the examples.
Yeah, just a few of the examples. How about giving us all the examples? How about telling us what all the changes are? Notice he picks these Republican states. In Georgia's case, a marginally Republican or Democrat state. He doesn't tell you what it is you have to do in New York or California. He doesn't tell you that there they just mail ballots willy-nilly, millions of them at a time, to addresses where they don't know if the people are still there, if they've died, if they've moved. People could get multiple ballots. My radio producer, Mr. Producer, my executive producer, got 2 ballots. One at his old address, one at his new address. If he were a thug, that is, a liberal, and he voted both, how would he be caught? Because they don't want to follow up on ID laws either, or signatures. That's the problem. Tightening up, making voting laws more restrictive. You know, the language is key. Go ahead.
Senior White House correspondent Kayla Tausche on our top story tonight. Kayla.
What's she, 11 years old or something?
In Georgia today, in no uncertain terms, advocating to change those Senate rules to pass 2 voting rights bills with 50 instead of 60 votes. The Freedom to Vote Act would set rules for the mechanics of registration, absentee voting, and ID laws. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act aims to prevent discrimination at the polls by requiring federal approval to change certain state election laws.
Stop. Why are they doing that? The 1965 Civil Rights Act, which we call the Voting Rights Act, prevents states from changing election laws in a way that would discriminate racially. The United States Department of Justice, if they have the case to make, let them make it. But the Supreme Court of the United States said that these states that were under the 1965 Act hadn't violated the act for decades. And so they ruled that the federal government can't control forever these state legislatures. So they want to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to overturn what the Supreme Court said. Now, if you're an individual and a state has passed a law, or a state actor, it could be local officials, are preventing you from voting or creating obstacles because of your race, under the 1965 Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, you still have the ability to bring a federal cause of action. Prior to the 1965 Act, you did not. So you still have the power, you still have the ability to bring a federal cause of action, a civil rights action, a voting rights action. So why are we doing all this stuff? Where are all the examples of this stuff going on? And incidentally, the Department of Justice took this act and applied it to counties and states like Pennsylvania, beyond the historically discriminatory states of the Old South. And the Supreme Court looked at some of this and said that the Department of Justice is really getting outside of its box in very significant ways. Go ahead.
Republicans have suggested instead modernizing the 1887 law on certifying electoral votes. But today, Mr. Biden, in a fiery speech, said there are no other options.
The fiery speech means he yells. That's all that means. Go ahead.
I've been having these quiet conversations with the members of Congress for the last 2 months. I'm tired of being quiet.
Tired of being
On the ground
quiet.
in Georgia, many activist groups were absent, protesting what they called performance art and demanding less talk from the president and more action.
All right, stop. This is not about expanding voting rights. It's about the Democrat Party making demands of the Democrat Party. That's why only certain special interest groups were invited. They won't come because they're radical. They won't come because they are demanding that the voting system be changed so they cannot lose. That is the bottom line here. This is one of the greatest attempts at a power grab in American history. And let me give you a touch of history here. When this Constitution was drafted and sent to the state conventions for ratification, one of the things that was very important to these states was that the states retain the power to make the election laws, which is why you have that provision under Article 2. The states, not even the states, the state legislatures make the decision. The state legislatures decide. And they want to take this away. They want to nationalize the entire effort. Now, the Supreme Court should this happen, strike it down. But the Supreme Court majority has gotten very, very weak. There's really only a few justices, by my count, really 2.5 of them. Thomas, Alito, and half of Gorsuch. They really stand up for the Constitution these days. I don't know what happened to Barrett right out of the box. And Kavanaugh shows a lot of weakness, too. And Hollywood John, the Chief Justice, is no Rehnquist. He's no John Marshall either. So they do take the temperature of the politics that's going on out there. So they're not going to interfere in elections. How about you interfere and defend the Constitution of the United States when the Democrat Party is running rampant all over it and shredding it? And so many of the changes they want to make, eliminating the requirement that you vote in your own precinct, allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to register, having automatic registration, mailing out ballots to homes, allowing for absentee ballots without signature verification, and on down the list, obviously are intended to create circumstances of massive fraud, particularly in the cities which the Democrat Party controls. This is why Donald Trump is so upset. And this is why the media and the Democrat Party are so resistant to any change that would try and bring normalcy back to the voting system. Not to prevent people from voting, but to prevent people who shouldn't vote from voting. This is why the border's wide open, so as many illegal aliens can come into this country as possible. This is why New York City now is allowing illegal aliens to vote. And if you have illegal aliens voting in one city, you're going to see it happen in many cities as a matter of scheme. This is a scheme. And if they can vote, and you don't have voter ID on the national level, and you can vote in any precinct you want at the national level, then how are you going to prevent illegal aliens from voting at the federal level for President of the United States? That's the plan. I'll be right back. Welcome back. In 2005, before Joe Biden got his cornrows and grew what hair that he has, and by the way, bald is beautiful, so I'm told, he went to the floor of the Senate and he made a speech about the filibuster because they were concerned that during the Bush presidency, the filibuster would be eliminated by the Republicans because the Democrats began filibustering judicial nominees, which they hadn't done before. And they were doing it repeatedly, particularly circuit court nominees. So under the majority leader at the time, there was Bill Frist, there were others, they said, all right, we're going to pull the nuclear option, which is going to prevent the filibuster, destroy the filibuster, end it, because of the way you guys are abusing it. And they were abusing it because, again, in American history, it was never used this way, particularly on so many qualified nominees as a way to stop the president, in this case, as I said, George W. Bush, from filling the judiciary, the third branch. And so Biden, among others, goes to the floor of the Senate and he says this. Go.
Specifically, Article 1, Section 5 of the Constitution states, each House may determine its own rules for its own proceedings. Precisely. Each House may determine the rules of its proceedings. End of quote. The text contains no limitation or conditions. The clause plainly vests in the Senate the plenary power to defy its internal rules as it sees fit. And the filibuster was just one of those rules. Many of the many rules that vest the minority within the Senate with the potential to have a final say over the Senate's business. It was clear from the start that the Senate would be a different type of legislative body, would be a consensus body that respects the rights of minorities, even the extreme minority power of a single senator. Because that single senator can represent a single and whole state. The way this played out in practice was through the right of unlimited debate. President Lyndon Johnson, the master of the Senate, put it this way: in this country, a majority may govern, but it does not rule. The genius of our constitutional and representative government is the multitude of safeguards provided to protect minority interest. The Senate Majority Leader Howard Baker in 1993 wrote that compromising the filibuster, quote, would topple one of the pillars of American democracy, the protection of minority rights from majority rule. The Senate is the only body in the federal government where these minority rights are fully and specifically protected, end of quote. Simply put, the nuclear option would eviscerate the Senate and turn it into a second House of Representatives. If that were the case, we'd have a unicameral body. It is not only a bad idea, it upsets the constitutional design and does a disservice to the country. No longer would the Senate be a different kind of legislative body that the founders intended. No longer would the Senate be the saucer to cool the passions of the immediate majority. Without a filibuster, more than 40 senators would lack the means by which to encourage compromise in the appointment of judges.
What do you think of that? 16 and a half years ago. What do you think of that? And he's done a 180, and this is the way the man operates. Now, what happened was the Republicans did not use the nuclear option. Harry Reid becomes the majority leader, and he uses the nuclear option on judges, district court judges, and appellate judges, but he excludes the Supreme Court. District court judges and appellate judges, so they begin filibustering more and more and more and more of them. Again, which hadn't been done. It was done before, to some extent, which is why this came up, and then it was done constantly. And then the Republicans take over the majority. They said, okay, well, now we're going to filibuster Supreme Court justices. So the Democrats always fire the first shot. And in this case, they fired it in the application of the filibuster to judicial nominees. And so now you have the filibuster rule applying to judicial nominees. So now they're very angry, you see, because the filibuster is applied to legislation. Now, the Democrat Party has used the filibuster more than the Republican Party in modern times, even in older times. And they used it all the time. Republicans have used it too, but less so, but nonetheless. Now they've decided this is their opportunity to fully and completely change this country. And that is what they're trying to do. They don't have a majority in the Senate. They have 50 votes. It's 50-50. They have a minor, minimal majority in the House. And yet they want to make fundamental, forever changes to our constitutional order. That is what's going on. And they're afraid they're going to lose the House. They might lose the Senate. Can you imagine if they had 51 or 52 senators and a majority in the House? There'd be no way to stop them. There'd be no way to stop them. So we're not going to win every election. And this is a big problem that we have in this country right now. The Democrat Party is utterly power-hungry and utterly rogue and corrupt. That's what's going on. Now, in terms of contesting the voting results, the Democrat Party in the last 20 years has done that frequently. And so we will turn to C-SPAN again, and you'll check this out. Go ahead.
The chair now hands to the tellers the certificate of the electors for President and Vice President of the state of Florida. Mr. President, the objection is in writing, signed by a number of members of the House of Representatives, but not by a member of the Senate.
Mr. President, I stand for the purpose of objecting to the counting of the vote from the state of Florida as read.
Mr. President, I rise on behalf of the Congressional Black Caucus to object to the 25 electoral votes from Florida.
Mr. President, thank you for your inquiry. It is in writing. It is signed by myself on behalf of my diverse constituents and the millions of Americans who have been disenfranchised by Florida's inaccurate vote count.
Is the objection signed by a senator?
Well, Mr. President, I am objecting to...
All right, slow down. So you need a senator to participate in this too, and there wasn't any. There were no senators who participated in this. But you see they're trying to reverse the course of the election. The Supreme Court had ruled in Bush versus Gore, Gore standing there as the president of the Senate, and he's the one who stands there as the acting president over the counting process of the joint Congress of the House and the Senate in the House of Representatives. And so you see the Congressional Black Caucus, Democrat after Democrat, objecting to this, dozens of them. The election, this is January 2001. As I say, the Democrat Party did something again that had never been done. They litigated this all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. And the decision in Bush versus Gore was that enough was enough. The Constitution left it to the state legislature to write the election laws. The Supreme Court of Florida was way out of line, just as the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania was way out of line in 2020, something I've talked about over and over and over again. But you're not even allowed to raise it anymore without being attacked. And it's something that the Democrats and the media, one and the same, will not even discuss. The constitutional aspect of this, which I discuss with you constantly. Go.
The idea that votes in Florida were not counted.
The clerk will report the objection.
2004.
The House of Representatives and a United States Senator object to the counting of the electoral votes of the state of Ohio on the ground that they were not, under all of the known circumstances, regularly given. Signed, Stephanie Tubbs Jones, State of Ohio. Barbara Boxer, State of California.
The objection today is raised because there are irregularities across this country with regard to voting. And we as a Congress have an obligation to step up to the plate and correct them.
Mr. Speaker and members, I dedicate my objection to Ohio's electoral votes to Mr. Michael Moore, the producer of the documentary 9/11.
First of all, we're here because not a single election official in Ohio has given us any explanation for the massive and widespread irregularity in the state. No explanation for the machines in Mahoning County that recorded carry votes for Bush.
Our people are dying all over the world. A lot from my state. For what reason? To bring democracy to the far corners of the world. Let's fix it here, and let's do it first thing out.
Mm-hmm. So you have 2001, you have 2004, and of course we had 2016, where the objections were also raised, including by this guy, Jamie Raskin, who served on both impeachment committees and now sits on the January 6th committee, and whose father had ties to the old Soviet Union and was an old Red, the Institute for Policy Studies. He was one of the founders of that. And of course, on that committee is Adam Schiff, who shouldn't be on any committee. He should have had his law license pulled by the Supreme Court of California for the way he lies during the course of official proceedings and plays with evidence. And of course, Swalwell, who I also think is on that January 6th committee. If not, he still deserves to be condemned, in my view, bought and paid for by a communist Chinese hooker. That's 3 reprobates who sit on the committee, and I haven't even gotten to the Republicans. And so you can see objections to elections are not all that new. People didn't say in the media, "Whoa, my God, they're attacking democracy." They didn't have Chris Christie out there, or who else? Michael Rounds from South Dakota, whoever that is. and others who are out there saying, no, there was no fraud. In fact, it was a fair election. No problems whatsoever. I'll be right back. Welcome back, America. I've said many times the media in this country really are the main reason why Americans are at each other's throats, why we don't get real facts to make decisions in a republic like this. And the American Marxist movement has spread like a cancer among their ranks. I want you to take a look at this from the Media Research Center, how this media, so-called, how they have lied and how they've been extremely nasty and how they have skewed the news. Some great examples. Go.
We talk a lot about biased reporting. This video isn't about that. We're looking at times from the past year when the media straight up lied to their audiences, whether to serve a narrative or push an agenda. These are 5 of the worst intentional media deceptions of 2021. Here's our first pick. 60 Minutes uses deceptive editing to generate a scandal out of thin air. In April, Sharon Alfonsi from CBS gave this report on 60 Minutes, where she gave the impression that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was caught up in a pay-to-play scandal involving vaccine distribution in Miami. Basically, she claimed that DeSantis was taking payoffs to approve certain retailers to distribute the vaccine, but not others. At one point, they ran this clip of her confronting the governor at a press conference, followed by this angry denial from him.
The criticism is that it's pay to play, Governor.
It's wrong. It's a fake narrative. I just disabused you of the narrative, and you don't care about the facts because obviously I laid it out for you in a way that is irrefutable.
Well,
and so it's clearly not.
Except they completely cut out the first 2 minutes of his response to her, which included an avalanche of points that, if true, would disprove her pay-to-play theory. In other words, they edited his substantive answer into a dismissive dodge. Moving on to number 2. From the Washington Post, there's no migrant surge at the southern U.S. border. Here's the Washington Post's fact-checker, Glenn Kessler, pushing this non-factual article around on Twitter. There's literally no wiggle room on the numbers, by the way. Look at the CBP data on border crossings. That blue line is 2021. You could write this article at any point in 2021, and it would still be wrong. Later on, the Post changed the title to, "The Migrant Surge at the U.S. Southern Border is Actually a Predictable Pattern." In other words, this article was supposed to be damage control for Biden. And hey, by the way, here's candidate Biden back in 2019 actually promising a surge at the border if he's elected.
I would, in fact, make sure that we immediately surge to the border. All those people are seeking asylum.
We give this article 4 Pinocchios. It's pure disinformation. Number 3. CNN lies that Joe Rogan is taking medicine intended for livestock. Joe Rogan, popular podcaster, you've probably heard of him. When Rogan caught COVID, he said he was treating it with ivermectin, which is an oral medication that people take for parasitic infections. Thing is, it's also used in way higher doses to treat livestock for worms. So CNN ran with this technicality and falsely claimed no less than 6 times that Rogan was trying to treat his coronavirus with a horse deworming agent. So, yeah, pretty dishonest. Here's where things get really twisted, though, because when the whole thing blew up, CNN's PR department gave this absolutely bonkers statement to the Washington Post. The only thing that CNN did wrong here was bruise the ego of a popular podcaster who pushed dangerous conspiracy theories and risked the lives of millions of people in doing so. So based on this statement, the people running CNN think it's okay to intentionally lie to audiences in service of a greater good. They admit to doing this, and they actually seem proud of it. I don't care what you think about Rogan or about ivermectin. You should still have a problem with CNN's behavior in this case. Moving on to number 4. NBC deceptively edits a 911 call prior to a police shooting. In April, a Columbus, Ohio police officer shot and killed 16-year-old Makia Bryant, who was moments away from stabbing another girl. All of the broadcast networks got their hands on a recording of the 911 call, and in it, you can hear the caller saying,
"These grown girls over here trying to fight us, trying to stab us."
NBC cut that part of the call out of their report. And when it came to the attempted stabbing, they only reported it as something that the police were saying in defense of the officer. They wanted this to be a story about a racist police officer gone rogue, which, for those who have been living under a rock, is kind of a media favorite. Last up, and it's probably not a surprise, the absolute worst media lie from this year was critical race theory isn't taught in schools. The media were saying this over and over for months. This is so dishonest for so many reasons. There are mountains of evidence that kids are taught race ideology in public and private schools. The Virginia Department of Education codified critical race theory by name as part of its curriculum back in 2015. Up until critical race theory became a national issue, a lot of teachers' unions and other organizations explicitly endorsed it, They've since scrubbed those endorsements from their websites, by the way. School administrators from around the country have come forward and admitted that it's in the curriculum.
Our curriculum is deeply using critical race theory, especially in social studies, but you'll find it in English language arts and the other disciplines.
And a few minutes on Google will turn up videos of teachers bragging about how heavily they infuse their lessons with critical race theory. Meanwhile, the media are doing this.
By the way, critical race theory is enormously useful. It's a graduate level construct. It's not taught in K through 12.
And again, it is not being taught in grade schools.
No one is teaching critical race theory K through 12.
Just to be clear, can you just repeat it? It is a law school test. What is critical race theory?
There's no evidence it's been taught in public schools.
It is not taught in any Virginia high school.
It's not taught in public schools.
This is sinister. We're past lying at this point. This is the media forming a united front to straight up gaslight parents about what their own kids are learning. That about covers it. This isn't a comprehensive list, but we think that these are some of the worst lies that we've heard this past year from the media. Remember to diversify your sources of news. And it never hurts to do your own research.
No, it never does. And to watch LevinTV and the Blaze TV network, which is why you're here. I'll be right back. Welcome back, America. Martin Luther King's birthday will be upon us soon. It was proposed and pushed by Ronald Reagan, by the way. And it's very interesting when we watch these Democrats in the media. They will be talking about Martin Luther King. They will be praising Martin Luther King, but they don't believe in what Martin Luther King had to say about a colorblind society and the content of character. You can't embrace critical race theory and embrace Martin Luther King at the same time. Oh, they'll try. But critical race theory rejects Martin Luther King. It rejects the civil rights movement. And no less a person than several of his former confidants have said so. Critical race theory is about destroying what they say is a white dominant society. Every aspect of it is poison, you see. That's not what Martin Luther King was about. Martin Luther King was about treating everybody equally with respect as individual human beings. Critical race theory doesn't do that. It just switches sides. It pushes a racist, segregationist agenda. And that's why we need to continue to fight it in the media that pushes it and the Democrat Party that embraces it. It is poison to a society. If our children and grandchildren don't love this country and don't love the fact that it's the greatest country on the face of the earth, then it won't survive. And if there's another war, and given what China's doing, there's likely to be, who's going to fight it? I'll see you next time on LevinTV.